Since its founding over 40 years ago, Ulano has become an industry leader for innovative products that place screen-printed images on an infinite variety of surfaces, shapes, and sizes. As part of an ongoing corporate commitment to provide helpful technical information to our customers, Ulano is pleased to present this step-by-step demonstration of one of its many stencil systems, the Ulano CDF Direct Film System. In this presentation, you'll see film selection, screen preparation, stencil production, including the step wedge test for determining appropriate exposure, and stencil removal procedures. All Ulano products are manufactured to the highest standards and are formulated to enable you to make consistent, trouble-free stencils. The CDF Direct Film System represents a major step forward in simplicity and speed. CDF Direct Film is adhered to screens still wet from the degreasing rinse. Water retained by the fabric softens the film emulsion, which is drawn into the mesh structure by capillary action. A single squeegee stroke skims off excess water, speeding drying time. After drying, the polyester backing is removed and the screen is ready for exposure and washout with plain water. Working without developers or post-processing chemicals, and without requiring temperature-controlled water, a CDF Direct Film can become a press-ready stencil in less than half an hour. In addition to speed and simplicity, CDF Direct Films combine many of the best features of indirect and direct emulsion systems. The CDF system is literally a pre-sensitized film. However, unlike the indirect system in which the emulsion top is blotted up around the mesh to adhere to the stencil, CDF films are embedded deeply into the mesh structure. And because of this, CDF stencils are capable of tens of thousands of impressions, and printed edge sharpness approaches that of the indirect stencil system. Most importantly, the CDF system has the advantage of consistent reproduction from one stencil to the next. In selecting a CDF Direct Film, a wide variety of products are available to choose from, ranging from thin CDF films for UV fine line or halftone work to thicker films made for use with coarse mesh. In this demonstration, we'll be using Ulano CDF4. Before stencil production begins, there are some basic but important preliminary steps to consider. We look first at screen preparation and examine some of the major factors that affect the quality of the print in very important ways. You'll first need to select a fabric that's right for the particular printing application. Keep in mind that the mesh you choose, not the thickness of the stencil, will be the major determinant of the ink deposit. In selecting a fabric for line work, to ensure an accurate print, measure the width of the finest line, positive or negative, to be printed, and select a fabric whose thread diameter is no more than 1/2 that width. If the thread diameter is greater than 1/2 of the line width, the results will not be acceptable. In considering halftone work, multiply the halftone line ruling by at least 4 to determine the minimum mesh count that is appropriate for the job. This will provide sufficient anchorage for the smallest halftone dots. In addition, it will minimize the effect of moire patterns. If the mesh count is too low, the stencil won't have enough fabric to adhere to. And finally, consider mesh color in selecting the fabric. Dyed fabric improves fine detail reproduction because the dye in the thread reduces light scattering, helping keep extremely fine details open. Dyed fabrics do, however, require increased exposure time. For this demonstration, we will use a 90T, 230T in the English system, monofilament white fabric stretched over an aluminum frame, since wood frames tend to swell and warp. Proper tensioning of the screen will assure good registration, help avoid premature breakdown of the stencil due to overflexing by the squeegee, and allow for better film adhesion. Follow the manufacturer's recommended tension for your particular fabric. In this demonstration, a stretch and glue frame will be used, but self-tensioning frames are a good alternative when mechanical or pneumatic equipment is unavailable. At this point, the fabric can be prepared to make it more receptive to the emulsion. This assures good stencil adhesion, thereby minimizing premature breakdowns. Synthetic fabrics need to be abraded before use. This initial roughening step enhances adhesion. Start by wetting down the fabric with a thin sheet of water on the print side. Scrub on Ulano No. 2 microgrid. Work the microgrid around on the printing side of the mesh with a stiff bristle brush. Now rinse both sides with tap water. As you can see in these micro photographs, there's a considerable difference between the two fabrics. The sample on the right has been properly abraded and is capable of a much better bond than the unabraded fabric on the left. As a final step before stencil making, all fabrics, metal, silk, synthetic, new or used, must be degreased to remove contaminants. Degreasing should be done as soon as possible before adhering to give dust and dirt as little time as possible to settle on the mesh. Apply Ulano No. 3 screen degreaser liquid with a brush. Thoroughly degrease all areas within the frame, not just the area of the stencil, and degrease both the printing and the squeegee side. Leave the degreaser on for 1 or 2 minutes and rinse. For larger size screens, Ulano Gel 23, a combined roughener and degreaser, offers a convenient one-step method for preparing screens effectively. Brush Ulano Gel 23 on both sides of the wetted fabric. Let it stand for several minutes and then rinse from both sides. Now, while the fabric is still wet from degreasing, proceed immediately to adhere the film. Since thorough wetting of the mesh is necessary for good film adhesion, apply Ulano No. 25 CDF Mesh Prep to both sides of the screen. Let it act for about 2 minutes. And rinse thoroughly. Screens prepared this way should be used within 2 hours and re-wetted just before the film is adhered. Because CDF direct films must be protected from sunlight and white light from all sources, yellow safe light should now be used. After cutting to size, position the dust-free CDF film on a flat surface, emulsion side up. If using smooth plastic or glass surfaces, place a sheet of unprinted newspaper stock under the film to prevent sticking. Starting from one side, slowly lower the wet screen onto the film. As you can see, the water immediately starts to soften the emulsion layer, which is being attracted by capillary action up and into the mesh. After applying the film, immediately pull the squeegee once across the screen, as if printing. This embeds the softened emulsion deeper into the mesh and speeds drying time by removing excess water from the screen's squeegee side. An alternative that works particularly well with large screens is to take the film, already rolled emulsion side out around a thin plastic core, and unroll it on the screen, maintaining good contact. Using paper towels, a lint-free rag, or a sponge, remove all excess water from the corners, the frame edges, the backing, and the open fabric area. Water left on the backing will cause the emulsion to dry unevenly, and water left on the fabric or in the frame can create streaking when the screen is lifted for drying. Now the stencil is ready to dry, without worry about dirt and dust, because the polyester backing sheet prevents contamination. Dry the screen thoroughly at normal room temperature in a clean environment, preferably with a commercial dryer or fan. Drying time will depend on temperature and the thickness of the stencil. The thicker the stencil, the longer the drying time. If you're using CDF TZ for use with water-based inks, blocking out of the non-image areas can be done after the mesh has dried. This is accomplished by spreading TZ emulsion into the non-image areas before exposure. After complete drying, a screen may be stored for up to 2 weeks in a cool, dry, light-safe area. The backing sheet will continue to serve as a dust barrier until the screen is ready for the next step in stencil production, the exposure. Exposure is a critical step, and without proper exposure distance and exposure time, all the careful preparation could be wasted. The minimum exposure distance recommended for all light sources, except fluorescent tubes, is 1 1/2 times the diagonal measurement of the image. While it's true that the Ulano datasheets give theoretical base exposures, individual lamps and ambient conditions vary greatly. There are several methods to determine what the right exposure time will be, but the most accurate method is the step wedge test. Later on in the program, we'll demonstrate how to conduct the Ulano step wedge test procedure. Upon completion, the operator can be assured that the stencil will be exposed properly. Before making an exposure, take the time to clean both sides of the contact glass to cut down on the chances of pinholes. Ulano CDF direct films require an exposure source rich in the long UV and visible blue parts of the spectrum. Several types of light sources are available. Metal halide is best because the light emitted is a straight beam direct frequency that renders a sharp edge definition from positive to stencil. Mercury vapor and pulsed xenon are also good. Fluorescent tubes or quartz lamps are poor but serviceable alternatives for non-critical work because the light they emit is more diffused and won't render a sharp image. Immediately before exposure, remove the polyester backing sheet. It will release easily when the CDF emulsion is completely dry. If it doesn't, give the screen more drying time. Good vacuum contact between stencil and positive is maintained using a soft blanket. At this point, the dry screen is exposed with the film positive for the correctly calculated amount of time. Now remove the film positive. And you may see a latent image on the film. Wash out the stencil, squeegee side first with a gentle spray of water. Then with a vigorous spray to the printing side. Thicker CDF direct films require a longer washout time. Now rinse both sides of the screen with a gentle spray until no foam or bubbles remain, finishing on the squeegee side. Blot any excess water from the printing side with unprinted newspaper stock. And dry the screen and frame thoroughly. Warm air, up to 40 degrees centigrade, 102 degrees Fahrenheit, or a fan will speed drying. Normal room light can now be resumed. When the screen is dry, block out all non-image areas with either Ulano number 60 or number 10 screen filler. These products are a safe alternative to hazardous fast-drying blockouts. Use either a small plastic squeegee, a piece of chipboard or cardstock to spread it evenly and thinly over the screen. Once again, gently dry using cool air. When it's dry, the stencil is ready for printing. The processing of Ulano emulsions is straightforward. However, it may be useful to take a closer look at how to determine the proper exposure time of the stencil. For this, Ulano recommends using a step wedge test. It's a series of 5 incremental exposures, all made on the same stencil. The test uses a film positive, designed to show a wide variety of line thickness, with Rubylith and Amberlith brand masking films. Use the listed approximate exposure time as a starting point. Place the coated screen with the positive taped on it in a vacuum frame and expose for 50% of the approximate exposure time for your light source. For the second exposure, tape the masking film in place so that it covers about 1/5 of the positive and expose again, this time for 25% of the approximate exposure time. Move the mask so that it covers 2/5 of the positive and expose again for 25% of the approximate exposure time. Continue to move the masking film over 3/5 of the positive and expose as in the last step. Now covering 4/5 of the positive, the final exposure is made. Of course, the percentages of exposure can be varied as desired, but the end result will still be a stencil with the approximate exposure and 2 exposures above and below this approximate time. Process the stencil as before and dry. When the stencil is ready, make a print from it. After the print dries, compare it to the film positive. Usually the highest exposure consistent with resolution and adhesion requirements gives the best edge definition and greatest wear characteristics. But bear in mind that the finer the printed detail desired, the more carefully overexposure must be prevented. The area of best exposure will be where there is no change in the emulsion color, or where the film positive's outline is no longer observable with increased exposure. Ultimately, the step wedge test is valuable insurance against wasted time and materials. Now let's look at how to remove the stencil and reclaim the screen after printing. First, remove the ink as soon after printing as possible with the solvent recommended by the ink manufacturer. Then degrease both sides of the screen with Ulano No. 3 screen degreaser to remove oily ink or solvent residues as much as possible. After degreasing, rinse the screen thoroughly with water. If Ulano screen filler was used as a blockout, water can be used to remove the screen filler solution. Apply either Ulano No. 4 Stencil Remover Liquid or Ulano No. 5 Stencil Remover Paste with a brush on both sides of the screen. Stencil remover should not be allowed to dry. The screen should stand for no longer than 5 minutes. Wash away the stencil with a strong pressure water spray, or even better, a commercial spray unit. In industrial use, Ulano No. 78 Haze Remover Paste, used with a commercial power spray, will remove ink haze and stencil scum. Ulano wants you to achieve perfect stencils every time. That's why Ulano provides a wide range of highly consistent CDF direct films developed for your particular application, ink, and light source. Full information on the range of Ulano CDF Direct Films and their recommended applications is available in the Ulano CDF Direct Films booklet and in technical literature available from Ulano or your Ulano dealer. Ulano is also ready to support you with sample packets, with demonstrations at major trade shows, with a worldwide dealer network, and with a telephone information service for fast response to your needs. For additional product information about Ulano's high-quality stencil systems, contact your Ulano dealer or technical representative.